All right, so if you're studying A-level psychology, you already know that some topics pop up in exams way more than others. Phobias? They're one of those core topics, and they affect around 10% of the population. So in this explainer, we're going to break down exactly what you need to know about them for your AQA exams.
I mean, we all have fears, right? Spiders, heights, maybe even public speaking. But where's the line? When does a simple fear cross over and become a full-blown clinical disorder? That's the central question we're going to answer today, looking at how psychologists figure all this out.
And when it comes to your exams, it's all about the specification. The AQA spec is crystal clear on this. You have to be able to describe phobias based on how people act, how they feel, and how they think. So that's going to be our focus today, giving you that exact framework.
So here's our game plan. We'll start by pinning down what a phobia actually is. Then we'll break down those 3 key characteristics, one by one. After that, we'll look at how to apply this knowledge, which is super important. And finally, we'll talk about the next steps to really mastering this topic.
Okay, let's get right into the fundamentals. In this first part, we're going to tackle that crucial difference between an everyday fear and a clinical phobia. Getting this right is the key to the whole topic.
So what is a phobia? At its very core, it's an anxiety disorder. Now the keywords you've got to remember, the ones straight from the textbooks, are excessive and irrational. This just means the fear is completely, wildly out of proportion to the actual danger. It's not just being scared of a snake, it's being so terrified you can't even look at a picture of one without panicking. The DSM-5, that's pretty much the go-to guide for diagnosing mental health conditions, splits phobias into 3 main buckets. First, you've got your specific phobias, things like a fear of spiders, clowns, or flying. Then there's social anxiety, which is a really intense fear of being judged in social situations. And finally, agoraphobia. Now this one's often misunderstood. It's not just a fear of open spaces, it's more of a fear of being somewhere you can't easily escape if you were to have a panic attack.
And as you can see, specific phobias can be incredibly varied. Seriously, we're talking about everything from arachnophobia, the classic fear of spiders, to coulrophobia, the fear of clowns. The phobic stimulus, the thing that actually triggers the fear, can be almost anything you can imagine.
Okay, let's shift gears to our first key area, the behavioral characteristics. This is your essential AO1 knowledge. In other words, what do people with phobias actually do when they're confronted with their fear?
You need to remember 3 main behaviors. First up is panic. This can look like crying, screaming, or literally running away from the thing they're afraid of. Second is avoidance. This is a big one. It's when someone goes to great lengths to not encounter their phobic stimulus, and it can seriously mess up their daily life. And third, we have endurance. This is kind of the opposite, where the person forces themselves to stay in the situation, but experiences just crippling anxiety the whole time.
Let's make this more concrete with a quick case study of a guy named Podrick, who has a phobia of women. His behavior is a textbook example of avoidance. He actively avoids any social situation where he might have to interact with women, and this has basically crippled his social life and his ability to function at uni. This is a perfect illustration of how avoidance isn't just a preference, it's a life-altering behavior.
Right, now let's go from the outside in and talk about the emotional experience. In this section, we're going to explore the emotional characteristics. What does it actually feel like to have a phobia?
Emotionally, it's about more than just being scared. There are 2 key emotions going on. First, there's anxiety. Think of this as a constant underlying state of high alert and dread. Then you have fear itself, which is that immediate, intense, and frankly awful response when they see the stimulus. But the most important thing to get here is that this emotional reaction is completely unreasonable. It's way, way out of proportion to any real danger.
And finally, let's get inside the head. In our 4th section, we'll unpack the cognitive characteristics. How do phobias actually warp a person's way of thinking?
So, cognitively, there are a few things going on. The person has selective attention, meaning they're basically fixated on the phobic stimulus. They can't look away. They also have irrational beliefs about it, massively overstating the danger. And they can have cognitive distortions, where they see the stimulus in a skewed way, like perceiving a harmless button as being ugly or disgusting.
But here's what might be the most fascinating cognitive piece of the puzzle: insight. In most cases, the person is completely aware that their fear is irrational and totally exaggerated. They know their anxiety is over the top, but they feel absolutely powerless to control it. This internal conflict is a huge part of the cognitive experience of having a phobia.
Okay, so we've got the 3 characteristics down. But to get the top marks in an exam, you have to be able to apply and evaluate this stuff. This is where we get into those crucial AO2 and AO3 skills.
Let's circle back to Padraig and apply our behavioral, emotional, and cognitive, our BEC framework. This is a classic AO2 application task. So behaviorally, he avoids social groups. Emotionally, he's feeling that severe distress and anxiety. And cognitively, he's holding on to those irrational beliefs about interacting with women. See how neatly this framework lets us dissect and really understand the case?
And this brings us to a really important AO3 question. So what? Why do we even bother breaking down phobias like this? Is it just some academic exercise for exams, or does it have a real point?
Well, take a look at this chart. It shows how effective treatments like systematic desensitization are. And you know why they work? Because they directly target the characteristics we've just been talking about. They tackle the avoidance behavior, help manage the anxious emotions, and challenge those irrational thoughts.
So ultimately, the BEC framework has huge real-world value. By understanding a phobia through these 3 lenses, therapists can develop targeted, effective treatments that genuinely help people overcome these debilitating fears. It's not just a theory. It's a practical tool for helping people get their lives back.
And that brings us to our final section, how to master this topic and what your next steps should be.
Let's do a quick-fire recap of the absolute essentials. 1. Phobias are not just simple fears. They're clinical disorders defined by being irrational and excessive. 2. We analyze them using that 3-pronged BEC framework: behavioral, emotional, and cognitive. And 3. Nailing this framework is your key to unlocking marks across all 3 assessment objectives.
Getting a solid grip on this framework is key. And if you want to go beyond just understanding this topic and truly master it for your exams, getting some expert guidance can be a total game changer. For personalized one-to-one and small group A-level psychology tutoring that helps you nail those AO1, AO2, and AO3 skills, feel free to drop a line to psychologysuccess.tutoring@gmail.com.
And just to leave you with one last thing to think about. Beyond the exam hall, now that you understand the architecture of a phobia, the behaviors, the emotions, the thoughts, how does that change the way you see everyday fears? It's interesting, isn't it? Understanding the extreme can really shine a light on the everyday. Thanks for tuning in.